Fabulous. So, I appreciate you for showing up tonight, and I do want to lead you through a little presentation that I have put together to really break down what I believe is happening socially and culturally. And I do believe that the myth of Santa Claus and the white lies that are coloring the truth are a big part of what is going on. So I have brought that in to the presentation that I wanted to offer tonight. And I really want to encourage you to also make comments in the chat box. We can also break from the presentation piece in terms of what I've prepared ahead of time so that you're able to actually engage and share your perspectives as well, because I know that you each carry tremendous value because we are the players on the field. So while it may be me who called the meeting tonight, I know that each of you have tremendous value to offer this world. And I would love to make space, which is part of the reason that I burned the sage before we were gathering this evening, so that we could really get ourselves here and truly show up. So please do use the comments or the chat box there so that we can have real conversation. And if you do want to make a contribution, then please do raise your hand so I know that you're wanting to speak, which you can do under the more options, where there's the three dots. Nope. You go under, oh, maybe I'm not the best one, under reactions, and then raise hand. So the little smiley face with the plus button there. So very much looking forward to sharing what I've got with you tonight. And I appreciate Beth Martins for joining in as well. She's got Manitoba Law Group, and I was speaking with her and her group last night around this time. So really thrilled to have her here to represent another province, and very much would love to know where everyone else is, whether we've got a house of Canadians here or whether we have others from further afield too. I'm gonna get into this presentation now. We got the blue bubbles this time. So I am starting out, notices lie hyphen ability, so that we understand that it is about the ability to lie until we actually call for personal liability and then hold people to account for carrying on the myth of Santa Claus and not reading the fine print, which is our responsibility to do. If you are new to me and my work, this will be posted to YouTube after as well. My channel is under Laura J.E. Hamilton, and the Telegram group that I created is also called Peaceful Inner Warriors United Assembly. So would love to have you join that group if you are not already a part of it. And as I did last time, I'm just shortening this slightly, but I share a notice of self protection just to give the example of what it means to put someone on notice. And just to really break it down, the difference between a letter and a notice is that we really like getting letters, generally speaking, because they're more friendly, informal, they're cordial. And it's also to say that letters are what make up words. And that is how we can wield the pen of our own sacred sword wisely. And when we put someone on notice, we are letting them know about our claim to have a right. And it's very important now more than ever to do so. And so my notice of self-protection is to say, this is not legal advice, and I accept no liability for how this information is used. And I believe and claim I have the right to share my beliefs with others in good faith and without being bound to any society, legal or otherwise, that may try to bind me to their rules and obligations. And I have my own beliefs and claim my right to express my belief systems freely. I do not accept liabilities for any man, woman, or person due to my lack of understanding of their situation and how my beliefs are being applied. As I did last time, I wanted to just bring in the definitions of good faith and bad faith, because right now there is a massive practice of bad faith taking place. And it's because we have tied faith to religion when the truth is, faith is very much what is required right now. Because if we are not faithful, full of faith, we will be full of fear. And right now, the propaganda is all designed to make us very much fearful. False evidence or emotion appearing real. It's all reactive when we are taking in all of that which is outside of ourselves rather than trusting that we actually, when we go inward, that is when we find the power that was always there. It's just oftentimes we need someone to remind us of that. And so I hope that tonight will really remind you of your power to be the creator of the world that we're here to create together. So I'm grateful to be here with you. And good faith, the definition from Black's Law Dictionary, is a state of mind consisting in honesty in belief or purpose, faithfulness to one's duty or obligation, observance of reasonable commercial standards of fair dealing in a given trade or business, and absence of intent to defraud or seek unconscionable advantage. Principles of common law, if you're not already aware, common law is the unwritten law. So we're going to dig into that within the hierarchy of creation here. And basically, the unwritten rule is what man and woman live by until we drop our standing into the jurisdiction of what has to be written in order for the corpse to understand its role. And so the tenets of common law are four simple principles: cause no loss, cause no harm, commit no fraud, and keep the peace. So when we are actually doing that, and we'll get back to this page after, we're acting in bad faith. And right now, the legal profession, from my perspective, is acting in bad faith. And it's not to say that every man and woman is bad that is doing it. It's just we have a systemic bullying problem that has been culturally accepted, which is why I'm going to bring in the myth of Santa Claus, adding an extra E for the energy that we are giving our power to forces outside of ourselves. And bad faith is dishonesty of belief or purpose, also termed malefides. So, having gotten that out of the way, the summary of the November 4th presentation is on my YouTube channel. I talked about the mixed war, and the short and sweet of it is to say that it's between the public and the private, and the dangers of lowering our status and consenting to false claims of being anything less than a man or a woman is ultimately going to make us subject to the rules, limitations, liabilities, and obligations of whoever created that term, which we're going to get into within the hierarchy again. And then anytime I or anyone else, including you, especially if you are referencing any legislation, which is the written law, that is when you're going to want to make sure you add a compared to or a CF, because in common law claims, we're only referencing a written law that is at a lower standing than what we as a man or woman is. And so knowing where we stand within the hierarchy of creation is incredibly important. Knowing the dangers of agreeing to be what is called an organized pseudo-legal commercial argument litigant. A litigant is another personage that is applied to a man or woman to create a novation, to wipe out any of the works that the man or woman has done, to let the system know that we are aware of their corruption. If we drop our standing, then they call a novation by assigning us a new term or title, and then our standing falls. So being very careful of that, and the dangers of being represented by a professional, which we've been taught to trust, because this whole game, this whole matrix has been about putting our power outside of ourselves. And so it's now an opportunity to understand that when we are being represented by a lawyer, we're being represented within the hierarchy, not as a man or woman, but as a personage. And as you can see here, we have currently a de facto government compared to a de jure government, which was the government designed for the people, of the people, by the people. And I wanted to actually just explain that de jure is the Latin expression for by law or by right, and is used to describe a practice that exists by right or according to law. In contemporary use, the phrase almost always means as a matter of law. This is actually taken from WEX, which is on the Cornell University law site. And I say next generation because what I found, as you can see, these are links within what I copied and pasted from this site here. And basically, it's interesting to me because it's made up of the next generation of graduates. So there were all class of 21, 22, 23 participants or to be legal professionals that have created these definitions. And de jure is often contrasted with de facto, which was then linked and I followed. So, de facto, an action taken without strict legal authority to do so, but recognized as legally valid nonetheless, which then said, see de facto corporation. So I went there too, and legal recognition of a corporation, even if the articles of incorporation for a corporation are not properly filed. To be granted de facto corporation status, there must be a relevant incorporation statute, a good faith attempt to comply with it, and evidence that the business is being run as a corporation. So I share the links and I'm happy to post those in the replay so that others could actually go back and reference any of that which I've pulled in to be able to make this presentation for you. Within the hierarchy of creation, as I've said many times, but I'll just break down quickly again, the grand overall designer, creator of all that is, made us, man and woman. There's a transhumanism agenda right now that is getting many to drop their standing to become a creation of the one that created the term that we agree to be, and then have to seek out definitions in order to stand under that term, which we then agree to be. And I do believe that there is a potential problem with the argument of being sovereign or souverain, which I am not the expert to speak into it, but I do say there's a big gap in what people believe that to be, and there are dangers within that, and within the Meads versus Meads case law precedent set in 2012. That is one of the ways that they can deem you a vexatious litigant, an OPCA litigant, that would drop your standing even if you've sent in notices prior to the novation they would make, by then making you an OPCA litigant because you agreed to be a creation that they have jurisdiction over. And so if you don't know how to actually maintain your standing, then you're subject to what is being run by a de facto government. The crown is not what we think it is, but it is having the legislation upheld by the cops, courts, and councils. And then the corporations are the public sector or the private sector of the public domain. What was interesting is that there was an HR personnel, I believe I mentioned in the last presentation also, but she had informed me that with the mandating of a vax policy, the only thing that was required was that there be a policy in place. Everything within that were recommendations. But if the ones who were having this assignment tasked to them didn't feel qualified, and we've been culturally indoctrinated to trust the professionals, they hired out their doing of the creation of the policy to ones who are maybe in cahoots with the government, and then they put the requirements or the recommendations as being requirements, which then are under the corpse that man and woman are upholding, which means that man and woman who are acting on behalf of the corpse are ultimately accruing the karma when we are bullying another man or woman because of the position that we're trying to maintain to look after ourselves and to stay safe, which is why I wanted this week to bring in the motivational needs theories. And if you're not already familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Abraham Maslow created the basic 5 levels of safe or of survival at the very bottom, with your physiological needs needing to be met, and then safety above that, which is where you don't necessarily care what kind of place you find if you don't have a place. But once you feel like you actually have that need met, then you can start looking for a better place to be able to go, which is safer. And then once you have that need met, you can advance into the middle tier of belonging. And from my experience of having been detained as a prisoner of the mental health system back in 2019, when I went through my awakening, I found that the tribe is turned against the individual that doesn't conform, that doesn't fit, that is a threat to the system, because they don't understand what to do with the one that they want the doctor to diagnose. When William Glasser was actually, he has his own choice theory, and he has a phenomenal book that I actually just bought today, but I read after I had went through that traumatic experience. And it's called Warning: Psychiatry Can Be Hazardous to Your Mental Health. And I actually referenced it later on, but I'll just bring it in here, because he demonizes the entire profession as charlatans, which isn't to say that I fully agree with everything that he says, but there was a few points within it that really stood out to me, and I wanted to offer that reference to you, because I do believe the Mental Health Act could become the Health Act, as I've said before. And basically, what he says is that the psychiatrist's first role and responsibility is to break the patient essentially from trusting themselves to put their power into an external authority figure. And Glasser's perspective believes that many of these professionals have been misrepresented, or misrepresent many of the psychiatric illnesses to patients as having a biological basis, and then refers all medications as brain drugs. And the book is full of statements comparing these medications to poisons. This is a review that I copied and pasted. So that was from a medical person's perspective, but I did feel like it was largely accurate in terms of, rather than merely suggesting the advantages of conventional psychotherapy over medication, he claims there is never an indication for medication. The central tenet of the book is that if individuals would get together in small groups and utilize his choice theory as text, they would be able to heal themselves without the need for psychiatrists and their brain drugs. I say that because belonging very much requires community. And when people don't understand someone, they become the outcast that is pushed out and then have to fend for themselves. And that's the way it's always been, which my experience helped me understand that the Mental Health Act is the modern day witch hunt, legalized and normalized. But after we actually have a sense of belonging, which coming into common unity with others who see the faults of what is going on systemically and are willing to actually say, this is not okay, and we are here to change that. That is then when we step into the higher peak of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is self-actualization and making the most of ourselves and what we came here to be. And another theory that I feel is very relevant is Tony Robbins's adaptation of this model, which is that you have certainty and variety as your base foundational needs. And once you have certainty and you can know what to expect, which we all need that, we also want to have some variety so that we don't want the same old all the time. We want to have a little bit of, we want the surprise element that keeps us fresh, right? And then we can actually look for the love and connection piece, then for significance, then for growth, and then for contribution. So I like both of these theories because I do believe that they tie together well. And I wanted to just bring in both. So if you're interested, you can look into those deeper yourselves. We've already spoke into the hierarchy of creation, and it's so fundamental to really understand where we are right now. And this slide is from the last time, but I wanted to give you the definition again of the mixed war we are currently in. And I break down words because I feel like it's very important, and the current lie is what we are currently living. And also, it is oblivious until made obvious because the lies are exposed, which is what we're doing and why I'm heavily shadow banned on most social media platforms. So if you find that a comment that you have made on YouTube, for instance, is no longer there, I did not delete that. And I didn't even know that you got one because comments are being removed and I have no ability to do anything about that. So please don't take that personally if it happens. I am not a friend to the system because of my willingness to say this is not okay. And I believe that I have found some secrets that I would like to share, and others too, because we care, which is the human connection that transactional relationships are less caring for. So the mixed war is between the public and private. A public war is that which is waged by him who has lawful authority to wage it. A private war, that which is waged by one who has not the lawful authority. And a mixed war is that which is on one side public, on the other side private. So I gave the reference for that, and also mentioned this is an attempted corporatocratic takeover where they are flipping where we stand as men and women to drop our standing even below the level of corporations. Because when you get called into the court of law, which is land, air, and water, so not just the jurisdiction of common law, which is why it's so tricky if you actually step foot in there, because when we are actually in the common law, we are above their jurisdictions and need to maintain that standing and also call for liability from the men and women acting in the positions within the court system that are trying to dupe us using colors of law, which if you're not familiar with, it's connected to legalese and it's a huge piece to this puzzle. And also if we maintain our standing and understand how to do so as men and women remaining in our private standing, with all rights reserved, because our rights are unwritten compared to those which are written, which once written, that's dead, compared to when it's spoken or when it's workable, that's when it's living, which is what the big difference is. We can change at any time, which is why we must maintain hope and why we must take advantage of the fact that we are co-creators of this reality, which is realistic evidence appearing legit in tomorrow's yesterday, that we have a responsibility to create a better world than what we've inherited, not a lesser one. So I just wanted to bring in reference again to the fact that the corporations, when spelt out with an E for the energy we give it, is the corpse that is lifeless until we give it ours. And then when we sign on behalf of the corpse, that's why we're assuming personal liability without the extra E, because we're actually accountable for being the bully representing the corpse that we feel like we have to. So the bully is actually being bullied, which is why it's so important for us to really get into our heads again the fact that this is the bullying that we generally thought was confined to school, but then we experience it more subtly in the culture that we share. And Event 201, I've mentioned and referenced previously too. But if you want to see what was scripted for you, that would be right here under the Center for Health Security. And it's crazy to think about what all of this is. And there's a huge part of me after a year and a half of being in this pandemic that was written because Black magic has to tell us what they're doing, so that when they do it to us, then they can say, well, you deserved it because we warned you and you just laughed. So I would be very wary, in fact, now of putting my energy into that which has been written and scripted, and all of the fear propaganda, or the fear porn, really, if you think about what's going on there and how excited they want us to be, which is putting our energy out here compared to keeping us pre-sent into the now moment. That is an example of it. It is also an example of the fact that Black magic only works if they tell us what they're going to do, and then they bring it about because we were so fearful, we actually put our creative energy into it. So don't go there. And that's a good reminder to me not to even share it or to reference it specifically. But it is the old habit that dies hard, which is the creative thought pattern that we have a chance now to redirect when we find ourselves going down the rabbit holes that are not going to empower us. And there is the karmic implication that is right now very much not being talked about from what I've been hearing so much, but it is us that will pay the karmic debts for harming others. And in the Nuremberg trials in the last war, I was just doing my job wasn't a good enough excuse. So we pay with our blood, reputation, self-image, and quality of life for acting against our nature, which is why we must stop letting our scared side rule our lives. For it is time for us to step into the sacred together. And I've got the sacred Sojourn of the Soul video coming this weekend, and I just actually posted the special practice onto my website, which is a breakdown of an acronym that I've created to really help support us in the inner war. So we are warriors of our inner realms, and it is time for us to bring the kind king and compassionate queen into the heart center of our own soul throne, which is where then we have the reference of the ultimate chess game, which is life. And the reality is that we have the option of these players. And a pawn is told where to go to the front lines to be sacrificed on behalf of the corpse or the country. And ultimately, the story of King David was told to me before I went into the mental institution. In fact, before I got locked up during my awakening, that I just call a very messy one. But beforehand, I was told the story of King David from the Bible, and how King David had found or seen a woman sunbathing on top of her house, and he wanted that woman. And so he found out who her husband was, and then got her husband drafted to the front line so that he would be killed, and then King David could then have his woman that he lusted after. And he was God's favorite son, was the way it was explained to me. And not being biblically oriented, though I have heard the Bible are basic instructions before leaving earth, for it is contractual law at its finest if we actually are able to look at the stories from a deeper level, when we understand that it is the King James Bible that is authorized. And that is why you can swear on the Bible in the court of law, because it's all connected. But the story of King David showed that the husband of the woman lusted after was the pawn. And then I was also reminded of the positions of the horse or the knight, and then also the king, were the three characters that I had in my awareness when I was locked up in the system. And I decided that based on those characters, I was going to act as the knight, and I was only going to leave my room when I chose to, in the second place. That was absolutely insane, which is a story for another time. But I do share some of these stories simply because it is something that most people don't want to talk about, because it's stigmatized and it was traumatizing and it's very scary. And if it happened to me, then it could happen to anyone. And yet I do it too, because I believe that we need to stop allowing our denials and guilt and shame to keep us from actually talking about the truth. And that allows us to then open up the characters that we are willing to play, and to bring that team into the throne room of our own inner kingdom, where then we can make choices from a more empowered place, because we have chose to become the conscious co-creator on the inside, that then changes the outside, because we own more of ourselves. So I do reference Meads versus Meads, and that's the case law precedent. And organized pseudo-legal commercial argument litigants is what anyone using an inconvenient argument could be deemed if we didn't know that you could object, because it is an offer that is being applied. And if you don't speak up and say no and not consent when the con is sent to you, then you are subject to the liabilities, obligations, and limitations imposed upon you. But good thing you now are aware, so you can beware and change your fate should that come for you. And I wanted here to just mention the breakdown of juris, which means of right, of law, and then diction, which is the choice and use of words and phrases in speech or writing. So essentially, jurisdiction is when someone else is able to apply their rules onto you because you consented to dropping your standard or dropping your status, which is really why self-image ties into this. And after 4.5 years of writing a book about the transformation of self-image through the hero's journey from a soulful perspective, what I've come back to, that I didn't ever realize was enough as it was, though that is the universal story that I feel we're all dealing with, is the fact that being a woman in my private capacity with all rights reserved is actually the highest standing that I could possibly have. That I can do other things. I can be a writer. I can be a creator. I can be a coach. I can be anything that I choose. But I am a woman first and foremost. And I say that because so are you. And so then I ask the question, what position within the chess game are you willing to take on? What characters are you willing to be? And how can you differentiate what you do from who you are? And to know that you are not what you do. It is just a reflection of the choices that you are willing to make because you know who you are. And it then gives you the creative capacity to be, do, and have more. So how much power will that position within the chess game give you? And then why choose to be less than your best? Why choose to be less than the man or woman that you came here fully equipped to be, so that you can take on whatever suits that you want to, but remembering who you are and whose you are in the scheme of things is a question I wanted to pose. And then I did break down jurisdiction and I threw it into the other slide, so it wasn't death by PowerPoint specifically, but this is really what I wanted to mention to you. And I got this one from this website here, which I found was a really good story, and I copied this piece from it. So is the Santa Claus legally binding? And Santa Claus without an E is actually how he is spelt. But one well-known Christmas anecdote is the timeless tale of Scott Calvin in Tim Allen's The Santa Claus. The age-old question, is Santa immortal or does he have a chain of succession, is answered within the first 15 minutes, when Scott Calvin accidentally startles Santa, who consequently tumbles off the roof and dies. So Scott finds a business card with the following instructions. If something should happen to me, put on my suit. The reindeer will know what to do. I thought of Santa Claus and the myth because it is so relevant to the white lie that is a full lie. And in this article, they actually reference the fact that the contract is not valid because there are four requirements of a legal contract, which is capacity, which is why the Mental Health Act is the modern day witch hunt if we don't know how to advocate for ourselves. Because what I experienced is that the 3-day voluntary hold that is offered under a Form 1, at least here in Ontario, was not voluntary, and they said I needed a psychiatrist to actually give me permission to speak with a lawyer, because they needed to flip my form into a Form 3, which was the 2-week involuntary hold where I became a prisoner of the system. So capacity is a huge piece that we need to understand how to advocate for ourselves. Consent is the next. If they sent the con to you, did you accept? Every offer can be negotiated. And then lawful cause and lawful object. So typically, if one is to go about challenging a contract, consent is the first subject on the table. Was a valid offer presented to Scott Calvin, and did he willfully accept? The terms of the contract were for Scott to put on the suit and get in the sleigh, which he did. But what about the fine print, which is the clause of Santa's deal? So when the fine print is too small, in the Santa Claus, the fine print embossing Santa's business card was only readable through a comically large magnifying glass. So in this, is this legally valid? Maybe 15 years ago. Today, courts require clear and understandable language in contracts due to the illegibility of the contract. Scott could have considered challenging the Santa Claus. So for instance, when I received the summons, my person received the summons, but I am not my person, and neither are you. But we generally don't realize that with real eyes to see the holes in the lies of the system that we have been trained to believe in. So when my person received that summons and I sent in lawful notices to not consent to being a surety for the personage that has been assigned to me, that I didn't have anything to do with the creation of that trust, which is one of the legal definitions for a person, that's a problem that the system are not wanting to respond to, which is why I have acted in good faith to try to resolve this matter. And because it's a politically motivated charge with being COVID related, it's not being addressed. And I am on the list with 7 others who received that same charge for speaking at the same rally where I spoke as a woman in my private capacity with all rights reserved. And who is to say that I wasn't and willing to take the stand under oath and say that, which is what we need to actually man up, woman up, to be able to call out the men or women acting in these positions, trying to force our hand for the name of the system that they are sworn to protect, which is the bar or the crown, first and foremost, which technically are of the same nature. But barratry is another term I didn't put in this, but that stems from the bar and is what is happening right now. So going back to the myth of Santa Claus, this article had said there were missing specifications. So this contract is missing critical information, such as being a surety for your personage. And most importantly, there is no way to end or terminate the contract, which is the same with our personage until we actually step up and say, I am the woman or man, not the person. I just have the personage that was designed to serve me, meant to be beneficiaries of the trust, and the government only the trustee for that trust that was created with the registration of our birth certificates, which we did not do, which means that it happened outside of our consent. So these are the things that we really need to be aware of, or we cannot look after that which was incorrect and only can be corrected through lawful notice. And according to the Santa Claus, Scott must diligently perform his duties as Santa is in perpetuity or until his demise. So that would be the same for us if we did not gain access to this information and start taking responsibility for our ability to change this. And what I wanted to bring into the picture is how damaging this notion of lying on behalf of others or for the benefit of someone else, which is called pro-social lies, is. It's very damaging. And this actually came from an article where a woman was talking about her own children and the trauma of trying to find out if Santa was real, and having access to the web now, they could look it up themselves. And when her son had asked, he was very disheartened to have found out he had been lied to, but also relieved to know that his intuition or his spidey senses were telling him the truth. And this is what we have been conditioned away from, because once we're in the know, then we're convinced that we need to continue lying to others who don't yet know until then they join the club, which is essentially what the bar is. When legal professionals get in, then they're sworn first and foremost to protect the system, the bar, and it's at the expense of their fellow men and women, even though they're accruing the personal karma for doing so. A white lie is a whole lie. Dishonesty may be culturally accepted, which is the cult you rally with, but it's a moral compromise we're now coming face to face to in the propaganda sold everywhere. We and our children look. So, unlike belief in Santa, which is something children grow out of, dishonesty is something children grow into, says Robert Feldman, a University of Massachusetts psychology professor who has studied lying for many years. In having children and adolescents purposely tell lies to mislead, he found that first graders were unconvincing liars. Seventh graders were pretty decent, but college students were experts. The reason they grow into lying is that we parents and influencers show them how to with our own behavior. One University of California, San Diego study found that preschoolers and young elementary school children who had been lied to by an experimenter were more likely both to cheat, they peeked at something when they weren't supposed to, and then to lie about whether or not they peeked, because the experimenter set the example, and so then they just followed suit, doing exactly what the experimenter or the parent or the influencer did, which is why in the special practice, the L is leadership, because we are responsible for leading ourselves first and foremost. And we can no longer go by the adage, do as I say, not as I do. For little eyes are watching us, and big brother eyes are watching us too. So if we don't turn this ship around, that will be a far bigger problem than facing the truth, having some tears, and then, yes, change is uncomfortable. But if we don't, it's going to be a whole lot worse. Honesty is a dynamic concept that takes vulnerability, courage, and discernment. They're excellent life skills to have long after thoughts of flying reindeer have passed. So that is where then I wanted to introduce you, if you're new to the concept of CARPMAN'S drama triangle, which is the bottom triangle, where you have a victim at the bottom looking up to a rescuer to save them from the persecutor. And right now we have a lot of people looking at the leaders and the ones that are speaking out and making a lot of noise, and the ones that are representing people or groups for class action lawsuits, that they're looking at almost to be saviors, when the truth is it is men and women needing to hold men and women personally liable for their actions and the lies that they are able to move forward until we say no more. And if we actually do that, we flip out of being a victim, which is a disempowered state. And last night on the call, someone had shared about making victim statements as part of a class action lawsuit, which is, I believe, dropping your standing out of being a man or woman into a lesser position that is not ultimately going to help anyone take their power back, which I believe is what we need to do. And that is when we step into being the coach, who isn't to say a coach is actually not one that offers answers. A coach is one that is willing to sit in the pregnant pause after having asked a question, that allows the client or the individual to actually find the answers within themselves that they didn't have space for or know how to ask a question that triggered their finding of that answer previously. The challenger is also because it's not a great idea to make white lies and tell somebody that it wasn't as bad as what they thought when they're asking for feedback, because your genuine feedback feels vulnerable and it can create some harsh feelings sometimes, and our emotions, especially if we're not being mindful and heartfelt in how we're expressing those, can hurt people. But it's more hurtful to lie to somebody and when they're asking for genuine feedback that would actually help them improve their performance in future now moments, which is why being a challenger may feel like the persecutor, but it's the empowered version, because we're not taking anyone's power. We're actually giving them an opportunity as an observer for them to change their behavior and then become the creator of something better. Because when we have feedback from ones that are willing to be honest with us, that love us enough to say, yeah, that wasn't great. This was my experience. And I hope that this helps you. And I'm sorry if it hurts you, but I love you anyway. And if we can actually become men and women that are willing to do that with one another and our own selves, imagine the example that we are able to set for the ones that are looking to us. We live in a culture where bullying is normalized. And from this, which was taken from an article, neuroscientist and business psychologist Dr. Linda Shaw says, what we need to remember is bullying can be found in all walks of life and takes many forms. Often bullying leaves no visible scars, so goes unreported and therefore doesn't show up in statistics. It's even harder to prove now many of us are working from home. Adult bullying can be hard to quantify, but everyone should be entitled to a safe and enjoyable work or living environment. But if invidious bullying has crept in, there are ramifications not only for the employees, but the business's bottom line will also suffer. And I didn't know what that word was, so I looked it up, which is what I really encourage you to do, especially if you're going to be using any notices of liability, putting a man or woman on notice for anything, is to make sure you understand every single word that you're using. Because if you are using a word that maybe looks good but that you don't understand, it could potentially open up the entire jurisdiction that using, for instance, the common saying, notice to agent is notice to principal is notice to agent. That opens up the whole dictionary to the legalese of the lawyers who know how to use those words against the one that thought it sounded good and so included it in a notice, but it dropped them out of common law and then introduced commercial law, because agents and principals are not men and women. And so these are things that we really need to be conscious of. And so invidious is an action or situation likely to arouse or incur resentment or anger in others. Another second, a similar definition of a comparison or distinction, unfairly discriminating, unjust. So it can feel very unjust when someone lies to us in order to not be the punisher or the challenger because they didn't understand the difference. And then you turn into the rescuer of trying to make somebody feel better about something that they were just asking for you to challenge them on so they could create something better. And if we can start to shift how we perceive how we interact with one another, how is that going to change the results that we are able to experience as the co-creators of this space? Systemic narcissism, this is the last slide that I really wanted to share, and we've already gone here with Psychiatry Can Be Hazardous to Your Mental Health by William Glasser, which is a phenomenal book, as I mentioned. But narcissism, we talk about narcissism, and oftentimes people talk about it in the woo-woo community, which I often have delved into the land of woo, but feel that it needs to be grounded, because if the woo is up here, it's just fluff, but when we actually give it legs, that's when we ground it with will, and it is our willpower that is going to help us change the way things are. So narcissism is extreme self-involvement to the degree that it makes a person ignore the needs of those around them. While everyone may show occasional narcissistic behavior, true narcissists frequently disregard others or their feelings. They also do not understand the effect that their behavior has on other people, nor do they care if it means they can win. So we do, I believe, have a culture of narcissism, and so it's an opportunity for us to say that it's really been trained into people in order to maintain this hierarchical model of putting ourselves above others in order to climb the ladder. But how is that going to serve us with where we're at and where we're going? And so I hope that these perspectives were useful, and I would love to have some conversation, which we can do off the recording. And so I'm going to just shut that off and say I hope you who listen to the replay will tune in the next time that I post anything under meetup.com under the Peaceful Inner Warriors United group. So thank you.